Hey, any sound at all? No?
All right. We are having some technical challenges today, but we are going to work our way through it. I am Dr. Erica Lacher with Springhill Equine in North Central Florida, and I am here talking/typing with Wendy Murdoch, and we are going to talk about biomechanics of the equine foot and why it's probably the most important thing you can do for the long-term soundness of your horse. Got a thumbs up. Woohoo. So for me, I'm just going to, while Wendy's typing some stuff into chat so I can address some of her questions, I'm just going to start with a little general about hoof biomechanics and why I'm passionate about it. And it's that probably the number one thing that I see on a day-to-day basis is horses with the toes too long. And they make fun of me at the clinic, actually, that they're going to get a cardboard doll with like the pull string, kind of like Woody from the movie Toy Story. And it's going to be you pull the string and it's me saying the toe is too long. But the reason that is a thing for me is that I watch the toe be too long, which drops the palmar angle of the coffin bone inside the hoof capsule, which puts strain on the deep digital flexor, which pushes the navicular bone up into the structures above it, and in general stretches everything from the toe all the way to the shoulder. And over the lifetime of that horse, we've created a long-term chronic issue that we didn't need to have if all we did was pay attention to the toe. So that's why I am a broken record saying the toe is too long. So there we go. So Wendy would like to know, why do we have this concept of long toe and where does it come from? I think one of the big places that the toe being too long comes from on a regular basis is farriers not having good radiographs of horse feet. And so some of these feet, including my own horse, I will take x-rays and you look at the foot from the outside and it looks pretty okay. You're like, yeah, that's all right. And then you take an x-ray and you look at it and you go, whoa, I have way too much toe there. I've got room to really bring things back. And the way we know that there's too much toe on that radiograph is that we know from a mechanic standpoint that if we draw a circle around the bottom of the second pastern bone and we take a dot in the middle of that circle and draw a line straight down, that creates for us where the weight from the horse should come down the leg. Like we know that from physics, Wendy's got a hoof for us. From physics, that's where this should happen. So we're taking that second pastern bone, that short pastern bone, drop down just a little bit for me, Wendy. There we go. So we're taking that second pastern bone. Yep. And that circle that the bottom of the joint makes, we're going to continue that circle around. Going to put a dot in the middle of it, draw a line straight down. And from there, we should have 50% of the hoof in front of that line and 50% behind. Now, when I say 50% in front and 50% behind, this is sort of pirate law. It's a guideline. If it's 52 and 48, we're okay. It's a biological system. If we are 70-30, we're not okay. And that is where x-rays are so helpful. The other place it happens is we have some of these breeds that have a tendency towards a long, flat foot. Thoroughbreds, looking at you guys. Some of that is perpetuated by trimming that is the tradition on racetracks. There is a thought in the racing world that if you make the toe longer, you make the stride longer. In my not always as humble as it should be opinion, that's the opposite of what happens when you make the toe long. You do not make the stride longer, and you set up those horses for way more problems. So I think you put all of those things together. First, the optical illusion that a foot can have around the bony column, and then some of the traditions of the horse world. And that's where we get the toe being too long as a chronic issue. So that's the nutshell version of the toe is too long. And exactly, Wendy's saying basically we aren't seeing what's inside. And that's true. And it's why I recommend for any of my horses that are performing on a regular basis, and notice I didn't say high performance, I said performing on a regular basis, I recommend radiographs once a year to see where the foot is in the hoof capsule, because it is so easy. Like I said, my own horse is one of these. Her hind feet, and we're not talking just front feet, her hind feet they will talk you into being okay. You shoot radiographs and you're like, that's not okay. Definitely not okay. So you only know if you shoot radiographs. And that takes a little bit of a relationship between your vet and your farrier. We tend to have antagonistic relationships despite our best efforts. But putting the two of us in a room with food is very helpful to create peace. So having us together on an appointment so that we can actually talk it out instead of playing the talk or the telephone game. And again, doing that in a I want the best thing for my horse sort of way is a really great way to start these conversations of let's just see what's going on and make sure my horse isn't lying to all of you guys. So, if there are questions, we can put them in the chat. And yes, food is so key to all vet farrier relationships. Actually, all veterinary relationships in general. I can say that we are a very food driven group. For time of year for us, I live in Florida, so that is it's a pretty similar environment all year. It's probably going to be hot either today or one day soon, and it's definitely going to be humid. So we don't notice a giant change through the year. Our feet tend to get a little wetter and sloppier in the summer. So if I have a horse I'm super worried about, I would say that I would take those radiographs in the summer. But in general, I just line it up with a routine visit. In fact, for us, we have a wellness program. And one of the things that we do is for any of our horses over 15, we recommend that those horses have radiographs once a year just to monitor for low-level laminitis. So Ellen, who asked how often should you radiograph, for any performance horse, and notice I don't say high performance. If you're riding your horse on a regular basis, I would get radiographs once a year to give you an idea on if anything is changing. If your farrier notices things going differently in the horse's feet, without a doubt a reason to radiograph. Your farrier is going to be the first person to notice, this is weird. There's a little bump here that's not normally here. This is weird. I can normally manage the toe, or I can normally manage the quarters. I can, the bars are doing weird things. If your farrier says anything weird is going on, time to get radiographs. But in general, if I'm doing survey rads, I do them once a year. If you have a wet season to your environment, that's when I would pick to do it, because that's when the hoof structure is going to be the weakest. So it's going to show you kind of the worst things can be. But if your horse is doing good day to day, I would just recommend getting it in there once a year. And again, those radiographs just show us all the ways that we lie to ourselves. And horses are really good at getting us to lie to ourselves. That's for darn sure. I see Wendy typing a question away. She wants to know if your horse is showing signs of equine metabolic syndrome. Should you take radiographs? Heck yeah. And that is one of the reasons that we take our seniors. We recommend horses over 15 get those radiographs. They are more susceptible to it. But in general, if your horse is showing any signs of equine metabolic syndrome, or they're just an easy keeper and you struggle to keep them at a body condition score below 6, then you should consider radiographs. And again, it's because we can have these really low level changes. And with metabolic syndrome in particular, we get the high insulin levels, which compromises the foot's metabolism of glucose, which creates a low chronic thickening of the dorsal hoof wall. So the hoof wall, you should have the bone and the hoof wall like this. On these metabolic syndrome horses, let me get straight to the camera there. On the metabolic syndrome horses, that very slowly does this, but it does it a bit glacially, like think eons, right? And so your horse has time to adapt to it. The hoof wall doesn't undergo quick changes. So much like horses can talk us into their toe is fine. In this situation, they don't necessarily show us a lameness. They don't show us an indication that something's going on until they're really close to falling off the edge of that cliff. Suddenly we x-ray that foot and we go, whoa, where did this come from? And so those once a year radiographs give us that guideline to say, okay, this horse isn't telling us anything is going on, but their foot is sure showing us that we've got little things going. And as Wendy asked, does the foot show signs before the rest of the body? And in my experience, the answer is yes. Like I will see a widening of that hoof lamina junction is our fancy term for when that gets farther apart. I will see a widening of that before I necessarily see a whole lot of symptoms otherwise. I will see changes before that with blood testing. So the first thing I recommend is if you're suspicious your horse is a metabolic syndrome horse, we do baseline blood testing for insulin levels. If they're under about 12 years old, we don't usually test them for PPID or Cushing's as well. We just test the insulin levels and see what we have. But if those levels come back high, we radiograph them for sure and just make sure that we don't have any indication the foot has things going on. From there, those horses, that's a whole nother podcast for sure, but those horses are pretty manageable with diet and exercise if we don't have foot changes. Here's the thing about metabolic horses. We need to know what the foot's doing so that we can say what we can do for exercise. Because the best thing we can do for these horses is exercise, exercise, exercise. And if the foot has a structure that can't tolerate that, then we have to modify that exercise program pretty significantly to make sure the foot stays attached. Because we do want the foot to stay attached. Typical cost of radiographs, and this is one of the reasons that I try to incorporate radiographs into a routine visit, is typical costs can be in the 100 to 150 range, depending on where you are. It's an easy thing for us to add on to a visit where we're already there doing something else. And it is also one of those things where, let's say I'm doing a pre-purchase exam for someone and we're radiographing some other part of the body. I will nearly always say, let's at least take laterals, even if we think the front feet look fine. So that's the view where we're looking at the foot, kind of from the side, that classic foot radiograph view that you guys think of when you think of what an x-ray of a hoof looks like. So we take them pretty frequently. And Wendy wants to know if it's important to do all 4 feet. So the longer I do this, the more I say yes. All 4 feet are important. If you're in the horse world, we aren't so good at change, and I have been guilty of this. So probably 10, 12 years ago, someone told me that I needed to shoot hind feet radiographs on a horse. And I was like, why? Why do I need to shoot lateral radiographs of a horse's feet? And more and more and more research comes out about how important the angle of the bottom of the coffin joint is, or the coffin bone is, to the long-term soundness of the proximal suspensory joint. We can talk about the whole rest of the horse, but when we're talking about the weak link of a horse, it is the proximal suspensory ligament. And horses who have a negative, what we call plantar angle of the coffin bone in the hind feet are, I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but it is multiples of 1. So, 4 to 5 times more likely to have a proximal suspensory ligament lesion. Not only that, but when they have one, it's going to be harder and harder for us to repair it and get it to come back to competition level. So, hind feet radiographs, really important. Plantar angle on feet, plantar palmar. So we just think about, those are the same term for different parts of the body. So in front feet, palmar, hind feet, plantar, because it's the bottom. So that is the angle. When we look at the coffin bone, that's the angle it makes with the ground. In front feet, it should be a positive 3 to 5. In hind feet, we don't necessarily know 100% the right answer, but 0 to 3 is probably the right answer. So they can be a little flatter. So yes, Wendy, with hind feet, we're thinking more about the implications of that angle for the rest of the hind limb and the low back. Because as we all know from the song, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone, connected to the hip bone. It's all connected. And so when we're looking at hind feet, we're looking less at laminitis, which isn't as big a deal in hind feet. We're looking more for performance issues. So we also have a question about if getting a good radiograph is difficult or not. Really, they're not. One of the easiest radiographs, and I teach students, we have students in the clinic probably 300 days a year. And I always start them on lateral radiographs of feet because it's the easiest thing we do. So you basically set the machine on the ground, getting them the concept of being straight to the foot is the hardest part. They take 3 or 4 of them and they've got the idea. I also show my age in that I've been around since before digital radiographs. So now we can shoot it and be like, nope, that wasn't the one. Let me adjust things a little bit. And I reshoot it again. It's fantastic. So getting lateral foot films is not a terribly difficult process. I will say some days I curse myself, and my techs definitely curse me on hind feet radiographs, because in order to take good x-rays of the feet, we need to have the foot up on a block. And convincing horses that they would like to have their hind feet up on blocks can sometimes be a challenge. If you want to make your vet happy, working on that a little bit before they get there would really make them happy. Horses don't really understand the concept of having their feet on blocks. Once we get them there, most of them will stand stock still. It's getting them on those blocks. That's the hard part. Yes. Oh my gosh. This is an excellent use of SureFoot blocks. So that concept is not something that horses are good at with hind feet. And they are much better at doing it with SureFoot blocks. The other thing that I have found is that I will take, I will take a SureFoot block and put it under the one I'm not trying to put on a block. So I put it under the opposite foot first, put the foot on the block, then pick up the one on the SureFoot block, put that one on a block, and it makes life much easier. Especially if the horses are sore-footed on one foot or the other. I'll put them on SureFoot blocks first, then swap out for my hard blocks. The difficulty, we can't quite shoot through the SureFoot blocks. Radiographs are really susceptible to superimposition. So if we have kind of some foam from the block shooting, peeking up above the hoof wall, that's the reason why we can't kind of shoot straight through SureFoot blocks and we have to swap out. And I have seen that you have some design for radiographs, and I have heard from other people that those are amazing. So, but if you have a set of the SureFoot blocks, great way to train your horse to be happy for the vet and the farrier to come out and shoot some radiographs. So anyway, back to hind feet and suspensories. From there, once we have that, this is actually a place where I love to use SureFoot blocks, is on hind feet that have poor angles. Those horses, for me, I trim the foot. Well, I don't, but we talk with farriers. We get a plan in place to trim and get the foot in a little bit happier place. And Wendy may have some better ideas than I do for sure. But I find that these horses, putting them on like the soft SureFoot blocks seems to get them the feedback they need to the bottom of the foot to kind of grow the foot the way I need. And then it's also a really great place for me. I put them on the softer ones and kind of push on a side just a little bit and ask them to wiggle. And it helps me strengthen all of those structures that help support things from bottom to top again. And again, that negative plantar angle doesn't just affect the foot and the proximal suspensory. It's really strongly linked to low back pain in horses. So if you have ever had a horse with back pain, they've had their SI injected, or they've been reported to have SI pain, make sure that as part of that, you're getting radiographs of those hind feet. And for hind feet, we only shoot lateral radiographs. Very rarely do I shoot the other views, but we're mostly just looking at them from the side. From there, it's unusual for hind feet to go off the rails in other ways, unlike front feet, which can do, you name it. I swear those things can turn sideways in that hoof capsule, but not nearly as common for hind feet to do that. So we're mostly looking at a lateral. Front feet, we will look at the orientation, also what we call DP. So we're going to look at it this way, and see if it goes, kind of side to side as well, because we may need to adjust that, especially in pigeon-toed horses. So if your horse does this, you're probably going to want some radiographs. Is this something you can see visually without radiographs to get the idea that you're looking at a problem behind? Yes, and in front as well. I am a huge fan of an app called Hoof Map.
Oh,
it's HOOFMAPP. It is probably one of the top 5 apps on my phone, and it has been developed with a farrier who does a ton of mechanics work on feet. In fact, if he doesn't have a PhD in farrier, which I didn't know was a thing, but he has a master's. Yes, Yogi Sharp, that's correct. His work is fantastic. But Hoof Map has been a really great way for me to go, I don't think this foot looks great. I'll shoot that, and it gives me some external markers that show me that things are not going the way I think they should. The other thing it does is it lets us play with that foot in the virtual world, right? So we can take a picture of the foot, we can put it up there, and we can say, okay, we are going to shorten the toe, and we're going to add 2 degrees of wedging. What happens? And we can do that as a virtual shot and see how are we going to affect the angles before we even touch that foot. So we can come up with something in a plan. And you can see, it's really interesting. You can see, okay, I'm not going to touch the foot, but I am going to put a 2-degree wedge on, and you'll see that doesn't do what you need to do. Like, you got to bring the toe back. You got to bring everything into a line. And all of the work on that app has been backed up by lots and lots of research by Yogi. He's an amazing, amazing guy. Yeah, does a wonderful job with things. So on front feet, while Wendy's working on my next question, on front feet, there are some other reasons why they can be what we call have poor medial lateral balance. And so knowing that you have that in a foot can be a really big deal. For example, I had a horse, we just could never get him comfortable up the limb. He had a lot of fetlock, just pain. Radiographically, it didn't look that bad. We went down, don't ask me why this took so long to come up with that I needed to shoot rads of him. But we had shot laterals, but for some reason, the farrier and we worked together a lot. We just neglected to shoot DPs. And we finally shot the front to back shot that we called DPs. And this horse had the weirdest foot. So when you looked at his hoof capsule said he was low laterally. When you looked at his radiographs, he was low medially. So that's where the outside can lie to you, and that's why x-rays are important. But once we were able to sort of split the difference and find a happy place, we never could get this horse perfect, but we could adjust him a little bit side to side every time we did him. And we got him much more comfortable on his fetlock. And so he was able to have a happier life for longer. And that's always our goal on these guys, is that horses have the happiest, longest life we can give them. So that for me was a great way to see. It was a very eye-opening experience for me that this horse definitely needed some radiographs to help guide us. So is there a postural stance that gives us a clue that the horse is negative? So I'm going to go back to this horse for 1 second, and that's not quite your question, but medial lateral balance. This horse gave us no indication that he was this imbalanced in this way. He was a walking horse, so that definitely made it harder because gaited horses are just harder to see everything on. But he didn't have weird landing patterns. He didn't have anything other than he was sore in his fetlocks than we felt like he should be based on what radiographs and ultrasounds look like. So he did not tell us. And again, that was the key. As far as postural stance from a negative coffin bone angle, hind feet, very often they carry their feet when they're just standing, they'll be up underneath the body a little bit. And if you think about what that does, that sets everything on the top line up in extension. So those muscles are chronically extended. We know from human work that leaves you really sore in all of those muscles. So all of the big muscles of the hind end that give that horse power, they're standing there all day long with those muscles in extension. And then we ask them to go perform. And we're also standing there all day long with that suspensory ligament in a suspension or an extension. And that's probably why we have the issues we do with those guys. Front feet are a little bit harder. I think they're easier to visualize that they're negative. Very often I can look at a horse and have a strong suspicion with front feet that they're in a negative palmar angle. There are those horses that you typically think are long and flat. In general, I don't find that if I just walk up to them and look at them, I feel they have a different stance. If I ask owners to keep an eye on them and see what they do, we typically find that long, low foot is the one. They will rest the opposite hind and poke that leg out in front of them. So when they're standing relaxed, you'll see them with that diagonal pair, long, low foot out in front, opposite hind end resting. That seems to be their go-to. And you can imagine what that sets up. This is actually where I love SureFoot pads. These horses set up some really fun little postural things in their body from that being their chronic resting stance. And it's where I reach for the balance pads for sure. Yeah, to try to reset that. Oh my gosh. And so like my horse, for example, one of them, he is long left front and tall right front. So he's long and low left front, and he's a thoroughbred. So I will frequently stand him on the left front. I'll stand up on a pad and remind him that foot can come up underneath him, that shoulder can come up. I'll then put him on just the right front and ask him to deform a little bit, just pushing a little bit, asking him to doing that, kind of 1 foot at a time around the horse is great for these guys. And Wendy, I'm sure you have lots of other thoughts on that, but that's sort of my basic starting point for those guys is putting them on something and being like, let me remind you that you have 4 feet and they are separate. And I'm going to ask you to wobble a little bit on each of them.
Yeah, that's great. Okay.
So we've radiographed the feet. Now what? Well, we fed the vet and the farrier, so they're talking together well. You might want to ask if they're more of a savory or a sweet fan before you start this process. I think we all respond to bacon. But anyway, so once we radiograph the feet, then we're going to work on a plan. And this is very often I try, maple bacon covers it all, that's for sure. So I always try barefoot if I can. So if the foot will allow me, in hind feet in particular, one of the first places we're going to go is to take the shoes off. Hind feet are very nice to us in this way, and that if we have things that we don't like about them, we pull the shoes, we trim the foot based on the radiographs, so that will tell us how much toe we can take off, and then we give them some time with those feet barefoot. And I start them on, I try for 5 minutes. My population of horse owners has usually got a day job as well, so it's hard for me to tell them to do something 6 days a week. But I try for 3 to 4 days a week on SureFoot pads with some deformation while they're doing it, like that wiggle side to side, just to give that foot the feedback that I want it to have and see if I can get them to kind of build a better foot. And very often by about 4 to 5 weeks, I've got a foot that has stayed much more upright. And I've just got a happier hind end on that horse. If the hind feet will tolerate it, we may very well leave them barefoot as long as we can. For many of the performance horses these days, the arena footings, we don't need shoes. We don't need calks. If anything, we need less grab rather than more grab with a lot of the arena footings out there. If they're a horse that is in something where they can do that, then I'm going to try to leave them barefoot. And yes, Wendy, I do see changes in hind hoofs as a result of SureFoot. We have other things going on, but I think the owners that I don't get to put them on SureFoot pads, And we have some horses that require some behavioral modification to decide they can stand on SureFoot pads. My own being one of them. She is such a wiggle worm. It took clicker training to get her to stand still. It wasn't that she wouldn't stand on the pad; she wouldn't stand still. So we had to clicker train her that standing still on the pad was the right answer. But those horses do better faster for me. So I've really liked the SureFoot pads on these guys. But from there, we will try to keep them barefoot if possible. If they are a horse where the hoof structure won't allow us to do that. So, for example, the thoroughbreds are the breed I go to, and I can say it because mine is one of the problem children. Nothing that we would do on his hind foot would have gotten him to positive. He doesn't have the appropriate foot structure, and you can blame nature and nurture for that. We don't breed thoroughbreds for foot. We breed them for who goes the fastest until they're a 3-year-old. And then, we're just breeding them from there. So the body can tolerate a lot in a young animal. I mean, if you think about us humans, I could fall off all the time when I was under 20 years old. Now, I get on wrong from the mounting block and I'm lame for days, right? I haven't even fallen off. So the foot is the same way on a horse. Young horses can tolerate a lot. But now we're taking those thoroughbreds and asking them to be performance horses for longer. And that hasn't been considered in their breeding. So that's why a lot of these have foot issues. So my long and low thoroughbred, he didn't have the foot mass. He didn't have the hoof wall. He was not blessed in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, not just thoroughbreds. I get it. I just pick on them because I own one. So we had to do things with him from a mechanic standpoint. So we do a few things from there. And I always combine this with SureFoot pads in some way, because like I said, I think it gives us a feedback to the neuromuscular system that we can't get any other way. But on him and on many of these guys, we always start with the easiest. And so the easiest way to start is that we aggressively rocker the toe on the horseshoe. And what that does is, so if we take that shoe and we rocker it, and this is obviously an extreme example, but then that horse tips the foot over quite a bit faster. And so we create, from a mechanical standpoint, we create what we call a mechanical wedge. And that is, at the moment that horse moves, we're pulling stresses off of the back half of the foot really, really, really early in that process. So we're going to try a rocker shoe first. And from there, we may widen the heels on the shoe. And what that does is floats that shoe over the ground, so the heel doesn't sink into the ground as quickly. So again, we're creating a mechanical wedge. If we can't get the foot to do what we want from there, and obviously you can see this is a process, right? We may have that shoe on for 2 shoeings, and then we see what we have. You can't turn it around overnight, but we can see what we've got with incremental changes. From there, we will go to a wedge. There are many reasons we try not to go to an actual wedge first, but from there, we'll go to a wedge. My most common wedge that I use is what we call a 3D foot pad, and it's that they're 3D printed. They're not, and they have some there's some things about them that are really great. But one of the things that they do that's really important in a wedge is you can't just wedge the branches of the shoe. So you can't just wedge the outside. You have to run a wedge all the way across the back of the foot, and you have to have it put sole pressure on the frog as well. So you need all of those things in a wedge, and those 3D pads do a really good job at it, and they come in different angles. So depending on the horse, we can go from, I think they have a flat to a 1-2, and I think they have a 3 as well. I'm not 100% sure on the 3. We're always trying to go with as little as possible, and we will combine that pad with a rocker toe. So we're always kind of doing all the things, and we're incrementally adding, but very rarely are we subtracting one of those. Once we find the horse's happy place, we're going to leave them in that product, that setup, for probably 6 to 8 months to allow us to get really good changes in the in the hoof capsule. If you think about a hoof, it takes about a year for the average horse to turn over a hoof capsule. And so it's a long process for this to happen once we find their happy place. Let me ask about Arabian gelding with degenerative suspensory ligament disease that is improving his suspensory balance trimming. Absolutely. I think on those horses, now those are a biomechanics nightmare. It is critical on those horses that they have really, really, really good trimming. They are a little bit tricky in that we have to make sure the foot is balanced, and we can't get it too high and we can't get it too low. They have a Goldilocks spot. If we pick up the foot, if we put those wedges on there, we're overloading the suspensory in a different way. So we have to be really careful with those horses. And while it may look like we can do some crazy things with the foot, I have found that my degenerative ligament horses do not like me to go crazy. They like me to stay very conservative, right in the middle, and do everything as proper and by the book as possible. So that's degenerative ligaments. So we're supporting the frog while changing the angle so that the frog doesn't drop through the back of an open back traditional shoe. Yes. So we have to support the frog for a number of reasons. And one is if we don't bring that wedge all the way across the foot, when that horse is in anything other than concrete, the back of the foot is just going to sink right in. Right? So you have to have support across the back. The other thing that happens is when we add that frog support in there, we are sending feedback through the frog to say, this is how you need to stand. We're simulating the ground being where we want it to, basically. And so that's why frog support is key. For some of these horses, we even need to recruit the back of the foot even more. And so we will put a bunch of dental impression material in the foot from the point of the frog back. And that's where those 3D pads are really nice because they help hold your dental impression material in there. And they give your horse, I always say it's Dr. Scholl's for horses. They're kind of sitting there floating on that cushion, and that makes them super happy. What does the horse over... frog not touching the ground.
Yeah, Oof. Sorry, messed up.
So the frog not touching the ground for horses it's just a really bad state of affairs. It's thinking about you or I. Now, you don't have to think about me in stiletto heels for very long and realize that probably doesn't go well. I'm a horse vet. But it's the equivalent for horses, basically. If that frog's not touching the ground, they're not getting the feedback they need up the leg to know where they are. And the feedback is so important. If you want to try and get a feel for how important feedback is, close your eyes and pick up one foot off the ground. Be near a wall, because you'll learn how bad your balance is. But it gets you really in tune to what you're getting from your foot. And you don't normally consciously register what the feedback is from the ground to your foot, because we do it all day long, right? It's sort of an unconscious thing that your brain does. But when you close your eye and pick one foot up off the ground and then try it standing on a SureFoot pad, and you'll really find out how unbalanced you are. But if you do that, you can appreciate what happens if that frog is floating in the air and that horse is missing all of the feedback there, because it's using the feedback on the deep digital flexor, on the navicular bone, on the angle of the coffin joint to the ground. There's so much feedback in there. Heads up, my cat's coming. There he is. This is default position when we record a podcast. So they get so much feedback from that area that is critical in the foot knowing where it is in space and time. And so we run the very real risk of increasing tripping hazards, just everything that we need from a performance standpoint from a horse, we are decreasing significantly. And tripping horses are one of those things that, for me as a veterinarian, can be very terrifying. And 99.9% of the time, for me, it goes back to the foot. Occasionally, the neck is involved, but I'm always going to start by looking at the foot and see, can I explain the tripping hazard this horse is having from its feet? And then we'll move up and see if there is a neurologic issue going on in the neck. but feet are super important. So why do we see horses shod so that the frog doesn't touch the ground? That's a great question. You'll never see one of mine shod such that the frog doesn't touch the ground. Even on our laminitis horses, now you do some strange things to laminitis horses, but they are in a life or death situation. But even in those, we will put them in some extreme rocker shoes to pull pressure off of that deep digital flexor. When you look at those, you almost always still have dental impression material underneath the back half of the foot to give it some support and some feedback. I strongly recommend that no matter how a horse is shod, the frog should touch the ground. And it may be that the frog is touching the ground through pressure coming up from dental impression material and similar, but we are going to try like heck to load that frog in some way. And if you watch those horses where the frog doesn't touch the ground, it is a bit circular in itself, and that the frog doesn't touch the ground. They walk different on the foot. The frog recedes further, and you just go round and round and round. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. So we are always, always, always trying to recruit the frog to participate in our activities. Ugh, yes. Not touching the ground is bad for frogs. I think it's bad for actual frogs too. But anyway, I digress. When frogs don't touch the ground, they get the contraction contributes to the depth of the sulci, or those grooves on either side and down the middle. And thrush loves to come into those sulci. So when we have those really what we call contracted frogs, they're also really cracked and they're not getting the blood flow they need. So the foot isn't able to kind of manage the normal flora. You know, let's be real. Feet walk on the ground. So frogs are exposed to bacteria, fungi, you name it. They see it, but the foot has a way to deal with this. Like it has to in the wild and through evolution, or it would be a chronic issue. When the frog touches the ground, it's going to expand in that process, which expels some of the debris and also brings blood flow in to allow the natural immune system to kind of do its thing. So a healthy frog, they are generally wide, especially in the hind feet. They're going to be very wide and very flat. And when you see, one of the things I'll do actually, going back to SureFoot pads, is I'll flip them over or find like a sandy area, same concept, but I'm going to put the foot on it and a really soft one. And I want to see what does it look like when the foot comes off. And with a normal frog, you'll see that you'll have kind of shallow kind of ridges where the sulci are on the side, but you'll see ridges, you'll see sort of the form of the frog, but everything will be really wide. So the frog will be as wide as the heels on the back of the foot. It won't be sitting in here with these giant grooves coming up. And you will have a very narrow and shallow central sulci, which is the one that sits kind of here. In the front feet, everything's going to be a little bit narrower and a little bit longer. And that just has to do with the difference in how those feet weight bear. But your frog should still be nearly the width of your heels. And the heels of your horse's foot should be trimmed back to the widest point of the frog. So I always, when my farrier has the foot up in the air, I look at the widest point of the frog and I want to see that the foot is trimmed back to that spot. And that will help weight bear. But you shouldn't have deep grooves down the side. You shouldn't have a deep groove in the middle. If you do, then the chances are good your horse either has a lameness going on and so they aren't appropriately weight bearing on that foot, or the toe is too long, or we need to adjust something in their life. And it is one of the places where I will reach for radiographs and say, if we don't have a reason for why this is happening, let's take a look at things and see what's going on. And is the inside of the foot, is the outside of the foot lying to us about what the inside of the foot looks like? Is there equivalent of the frog and the human foot? I'm a really bad human podiatrist, but I would say that pad on the back of your heel is probably pretty similar. That does a lot of kind of weight bearing, storing energy and pushing it back up. one of the things that we need to think about with horses that we often forget, because they didn't actually evolve to be our riding companion, right? They evolved to trot long distances. And so the goal of the frog is to help transfer energy into the deep digital flexor, which then stores it so that so it stores it on the concussion phase and releases it on the stride phase, basically. So stance, you're storing concussion energy. Stride, you're losing it. And so the frog is there as a wide structure that is supposed to take that energy and make it not be quite so, kind of bangy, but take most of it and put it up into the foot. It's not actually supposed to dissipate all of it. It's supposed to help it go into the leg in a way that the deep digital flexor can store it and then release it. This is one of the coolest lectures I ever went to at a conference, was with a human. Yes, exactly like a pogo stick, Wendy. He was a human, or he wasn't a human. He was a basic level anatomist. So he looked at, when I say basic level, that just means like he looked at muscle, not necessarily horse muscle. He looked at muscle of everything. And his PhD was on the deep digital flexor muscle of horses. So talk about specific. And horses are the most efficient critter on the planet for taking concussion energy and storing it in that muscle.
Wow.
But that's entirely what they're designed to do at the trot. The other gaits are different, but at the trot, that's what they're designed to do, is store energy and release it in a cyclical fashion as they trot across the steppes of the Mongolian plains. Yeah. And then we ask them to jump things and turn around things and slide and stop. So that was just, it was an amazing lecture. It's the same lecture I learned that oddly sloths have anaerobic metabolism, which seems weird. Yeah, exactly. Jumping is using ground reaction force. So I will see if I can find his information for you, Wendy. It was years ago at an Florida Equine Practitioners Conference, but he has done some really cool anatomy work comparing stuff. So I did think this is a total rabbit hole, but he was discussing the sloths anaerobic. So in the rest of us, anaerobic metabolism is what you use when you hit like high speed, when you're doing that high, fast work and your cells aren't using oxygen because you're doing things so quickly that you don't even have time to deliver oxygen to your cells. And yet sloths use that as their primary metabolism, which just seems weird to me. Oh, and they have 6 cervical vertebrae along with manatees in the mammal world. That's really weird.
Yep.
Yeah. That's super cool. Because sort of the definition of a mammal is that you have 7 cervical vertebrae. Apparently, unless you're a sloth or a manatee. So everyone who's listening is now ready for Trivia Tuesday.
Okay.
Wow, you're friends. And Ellen says that some sloths have algae on their hair, which is proof that they move really slow, right? So I don't know why he didn't have a good explanation on why they had anaerobic metabolism, because he was blown away by that as well. They move so slow. Why would they have anaerobic metabolism? I can go on for hours at this. So Wendy, you just tell me when to keep going. Back to feet. Yeah. So, I see my population of horses that I see tends to be lower level, although we do have some higher level horses in the practice. But overall, I always say like I'm a typical client. So my horse shows maybe once a month, every other month. I ride her, a few days a week as my schedule allows, which is always the tricky part. But I very much enjoy my horse. My husband would say she may come ahead of him on some days. But, I want her to have a long and happy career. And that's the most important thing to me, is that she stays comfortable. And so from that standpoint, the number one thing I can do to affect that from a long-term standpoint is that I have a foot that's really happy. I have a foot that is supporting all of her weight as best I can do. and I have a foot that's traveling across the ground as best it can. And that is where those basic mechanics of a tight foot, so a short toe, a good back of the foot with a nice healthy frog that's really supporting weight, does more for her than probably anything else I can do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you think about how often we're affecting these feet, we're trimming them somewhere between every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on where you live and the weather at the time of year. So it's something you can very easily influence, and it's something that without a lot of extra effort, you can use to add quality to your horse's life for sure. And Wendy has a question about supplementation to help hoof health, or is that a bunch of marketing? Well, as a strong anti-supplement person, it's a bunch of marketing. If your horse is on a commercially available diet, and even some of the kind of hyped vitamin mineral ration balancer type ones that are not hugely commercial, you're going to meet all of their needs. Biotin, methionine, and zinc are basically what feet are made up of. There's some copper in there too. And those things are relatively abundant in horse diets just in general based on what they eat. The commercial diets are supplemented a bit with biotin, a bit with zinc to make up for any deficiencies they may see. But in general, horses do not need supplementation. I violate that rule when I have laminitis horses or something else where I'm trying to grow out a foot as fast as I can. But I will be 100% honest with you and say that that is me and the owner and the farrier grasping at straws and trying like heck to do anything we can for those horses, and recognizing that that supplement is probably not doing much for that horse, but it's making us feel better. And it is not among the most expensive ones and has very low possibility of causing harm. So I say that it has a low probability of harm, potential probability of assistance. So we're going to go with it and see what we got. But in general, that's the only place I use supplements. Otherwise, we base all of our diets on good quality hay, as Wendy asked, and then we add a commercial concentrate as needed to round out any deficiencies we may have. For most horses, those deficiencies are going to be calories. Let's be honest, for most horses, it's actually not going to be calories, but so we're going to try to find a concentrate that has few of those as possible, but it's going to be calories and then a vitamin mineral package. All of your commercial diets have reasonable vitamin mineral packages, so I don't overly worry about that much. I just I go with what makes sense from my horse's exercise, metabolism, lifestyle, all of those things go into that. So for example, my horse competes. I show in the meter 10s. I show maybe once a month. I ride 3 days a week because that's what my schedule will do. She is out on very good pasture for much of the year. And she is half warm blood, half quarter horse. So she comes from a metabolically ungifted genetic background. Those are some easy keeper breeds. So she does all that on some Timothy hay added to her pasture time. And that hay is mostly to keep her busy while she's in the stall during the day. And then she is on a ration balancer. She gets Neutrina's Top Line Balance, and she competes on that. So she doesn't need extra calories. I just need to make sure she has all the protein, vitamins, and minerals she needs to kind of balance out what may be deficient in hay or grass. And so that's all she gets. She gets a pound of concentrate a day. And she's absolutely fine on a pound of concentrate a day. Food is not love. You may feel that way. And stabled versus pasture horses, do you see a lot of difference? I see far better feet on horses that go out a lot. Horses were designed to move. And I know that there are areas of the country where that can be really difficult. I was in Long Island last year, helping with the vet school up there. And, finding a way to get turnout for horses on Long Island is not easy. So for my horses that have to be stabled a lot, I try to find some way for them to go out and walk a lot. If that's that they get ridden every day and we make sure that they are walked for at least an hour during that process, if we can put them onto treadmills, if we can put them onto walkers, like it doesn't really matter as much to me how they walk, but I need to get them walking so that they are expanding the feet. If you put pedometers on horses that are turned out, you'll see that they do a lot of movement through the night. And this is where it goes back to the more we can keep horses sort of natural. They're not wild horses. I make no bones about it. My thoroughbred in particular would die if he had to be wild for more than 2 days. But the more we can keep them in appropriate circumstances. So in small herds, I have mine in a herd of 3 and a herd of 2 because that's how I can keep everybody happy. One of those just creates havoc in any herd. But so figuring out, how I can put them in a small herd situation where I'm less likely to have injury because they are show horses. I don't want to have, bites and kicks and all of the normal hierarchy things. I absolutely get that. But when there's more than one in a pasture, there's some movement that goes on. Someone, I'm going to go over here and look at that. Well, then the friend has to go over there and look at that too. Everybody's got to walk to the water together. They got to walk to the hay together. They got to, there's just more movement that happens when they're in a group dynamic. So the more turnout I can do, the better. I recognize that on a lot of our show horses, we need to have them inside for some portion of the day for, cosmetic reasons, as well as in Florida. It gets bloody hot in the summer, winter, bloody cold, some areas, managing those. But if you can figure out how those horses are out for 6 to 8 hours a day, fantastic for feet. Absolutely fantastic. Stabled horses, if your horses are in the barn, you want to make sure that not only are they walking a lot, but that you are monitoring those wet spots in the stall. Stall cleanliness, huge deal for feet. They do not handle living in a dirty stall well. You will dissolve a frog that way. Yeah. And as Wendy said, walking is good for the people too. It is. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So Wendy's asking about white feet versus dark feet. Boy, are there wives' tales in the equine world. We have a whole podcast on myths, legends, and sketchy ideas. And this is one of them. That and walking colics, both very not true. So there is no mechanical difference, and this has been proven beyond a doubt with white feet versus dark feet. When you take your hoof knife across them, they carve a little differently. So white feet feel a little waxier, dark feet feel a little crunchier, for lack of a better term. But when you put them into a press, where you're measuring forces you can put on them, when you break them, when you put them in the things that break things apart, when you do all of these mechanical tests on them, there is no difference between white feet and dark feet. So also a wives' tale. I think one of the places this comes from is that you can see in white feet, you can often see a little bit of bruising, and that's common. I mean, if you look at me on any given day, there's some bruising, and it's probably that I ran into the coffee table. And your horse is no different. So just because there's a little bit of bruising in a foot that you see every now and then, it's not really a big deal. But I think because we can see it in white feet, we as humans have, over the eons, tended to freak out a little bit and gone, whoa, that's bad. Chips and cracks with the color of the feet. Yeah, I think you're right. We can see it a little bit more on white feet. I find that I'm going to go back to mechanics here and chips and cracks, but if I keep that foot appropriate mechanically, I get a better quality foot that handles the chips and cracks of life a lot better. That being said, the crack that comes up the center of the toe on lots of horses, that can be related to what we call a deep crena. So the coffin bone where it comes around the front in that half circle, there's a little divot out of the front of it. If that is really deep, those horses, and that's a normal anatomic variation, but those horses will usually have a crack in the front of their foot. It doesn't go very far. And the only way you can get it to go away is with shoes. So it will just bother the heck out of you unless you want to go ahead and put shoes on. but it is a normal anatomic variation and it's okay. Weather conditions that influence chipping and cracking. Most people worry about adding a moisturizer to their horse's feet and all of these things that we can put on. None of the topical products have actually been shown to really do anything. And I find most horses handle dry weather better than they do wet weather. So in really dry weather, the feet they'll get really hard, and they usually handle that pretty well if they're mechanically set up. If they aren't mechanically set up, that's where we have a lot of chipping and cracking. There have been lots of studies on lots of hoof paints that are out there, and none of them have added moisture to the foot at all. None of them. So even ones that say things like they make rain and other similar claims, no, they do not add moisture. I will say very rarely does this come up for those types of studies, because I've had this conversation with several farriers. But in very wet areas, you can use an oil-based product to help keep moisture out of the foot, but it only lasts until the foot wears it off. So a few hours at best. So for us in Florida, for example, this is a chronic problem. We get afternoon rainstorms just about every day of the summer, and we'll get an inch of rain in 20, 30 minutes. Those feet will get really, really wet, and then they'll be standing in wet grass. For those horses, I do try to paint their feet right before they get turned out. Just again, it gives us a few hours of kind of barrier to the wetness coming in. And then I really, 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 really try to paint their feet before I hose them off. Because that I can control. I know when that's going to happen. I can say, all right, I'm going to paint these feet before I get them wet. Okay, so yes, we're painting feet so that we feel good, but there's a lot of things we do with horses that make us feel good. If you want to paint your horse's feet and it makes you feel good, I'm totally down with it. You're not hurting anything. And then with the crenna, the deep crenna, can you simply roll the toe a bit more? For some horses, yes, but honestly, for some of these horses that have really deep crenna and that's their normal, doesn't matter how much you roll the toe, they're still going to have it. And it's a shallow crack. It never goes up more than like 3/4 of an inch. No matter what you do, it's never going to get bigger. It's also not going to get smaller. So if you as an owner, if you have radiographs and you've talked with your veterinarian and your farrier, you know that's what it is and you can live with it. It'll be okay. It's not a problem. So hoof armor. Yes, I am familiar with hoof armor. We use it on a few of the horses in this area that we want to keep barefoot. The trick for us is in our humidity, we have to be very careful that we let it hang, like we put it on the foot, and then we have to really hold the foot up for a little bit longer than they say to get it to dry fully before we put that foot back down. But I've really liked it for keeping some of these horses barefoot. The Swedish Olympic team really put out there that you can do a lot with these horses barefoot. And I fully agree that the footings that we have now in the performance arenas, really, there's some advantages to being barefoot for those horses. But at the same time, those footings can be very abrasive, and hoof armor helps us keep the foot there. Those guys used VetTech super fast. For whatever reason, in a lot of our area, it's easier to get hoof armor than it is super fast. And that's how we've used the hoof armor, is that similar concept. And it's worked very, very well for us. I haven't yet used it on a horse that has the really, really, really wet feet, but I have a feeling it would help me in some of those scenarios as well. Yeah, so hoof armor is a great product. And, in general, I think there's a myth out there that we always want to put shoes on a horse. And a good farrier and a good veterinarian, we don't want to put shoes on a horse until we have to. But Mother Nature sometimes made it such that we have to. And in particular, horses who have some conformational defects, we're going to use shoes when what we have won't let us mechanically do what we want to do, or what we have is mechanically creating a problem that we need to fix. So all of us want to keep that foot barefoot as long as we can. Yeah, and it reduces the amount of wear so that if you're getting more wear than what the horse grows. So, and this can be a problem with the footing in the showgrounds. So, I'm blessed to be near World Equestrian Center, which is amazing, but their footing can be a bit abrasive. So while I try to keep my horse barefoot, if I'm showing there a little more often, I can't keep up with what the footing is taking away from her foot. It's literally wearing it down into a nub. Not all horses have that problem, but for some of those, Hoof Armor is a great, great, great product to allow us to keep those horses barefoot as long as we can. The bottom line, no hoof, no horse. So we have a lot of sayings in equine medicine and around the horse world, and there is none more true than no hoof, no horse. I think we get caught up in some of the fads on what we can do with it, but good trimming, good basic trimming, following what the foot is telling us from a biomechanics standpoint is the number one thing you can do. Using apps like Hoof Map to help you figure out what that is, having a great relationship with your veterinarian and your farrier, feeding them both something savory or sweet, depending on their request, to have them have a great relationship together so they can come together and make a plan for your horse that really, really, really helps maximize the mechanics of their foot. So when I'm looking at a horse, it's not the length of their mane, but the quality of their hoof and ability to carry a saddle. So true. So true. The number one thing I look at, I walk up to a horse for a pre-purchase exam for anyone, and in particular for myself. I walk up and see a bad foot, and I get on the phone right away, and I'm like, we got a foot that's going to be a problem. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Because I can do a lot of things with a lot of other structures, but if the feet aren't cooperating, there's nothing I can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy says, thank you. This has been fantastic. I'm really good at technical challenges. What can I say? But if you want to find out more from me, I have a podcast called Straight from the Horse Doctor's Mouth. It's available anywhere. My vet clinic is Springhill Equine Veterinary Clinic. We have a very active YouTube channel. We have a very active website that has a blog from lots of blogs from our recently amazing, he just departed, our clinic cat, Tony, wrote blogs for years and years and years. Yeah, I'm so sad. It was a rough day. But it's been taken over by Winnie the Field Mouse, who now writes all of our blogs. So there's tons of information on our website, our YouTube channel. We're very active on Facebook and Instagram as Horse Doctor Pod. So if you want to find me, you can certainly find me and ask me any and all questions. And I want to thank you, Wendy. This has been fantastic. I always enjoy my time here. So once again, thank you.
Bye.